Josie is our speaker for today, and she's a full stack developer living and working in South Korea. She has won multiple hackathons and is currently organizing one in Seoul. She founded and runs Constant Coding, a group dedicated to empowering people from underrepresented groups to get into tech. In 2023, she was listed as one of the top 100 technologies to watch by women who code. And during her spare time, she loves making platforms that help people facing niche challenges. And I would also add that Josie is the winner of the Women Who Code Hackathon for Social Good 2023. So, Josie, over to you.
Thank you. I'll share my screen now. Now I will. Okay, here we go. Hopefully you'll all be able to see this. All right, so let's get started. Hopefully everything works smoothly. As you already know, that's the title, and it's wonderful to be invited to give this talk, this guide to hackathons. As you already know, my name is Josie Daw, and today I'm going to go over the journey that's led me to victory at a few different hackathons, including, as was already mentioned, the recent Women Who Code Hackathon for Social Good. Let me preface this by saying this presentation isn't just about winning. It's about embracing the process from the idea to the final presentation so that you can be both prepared and learn how to enjoy the insanity that is hackathons. A little bit more about me. I live in South Korea, so this talk is happening just after 9 a.m. my time, so sorry if I'm a bit tired. In my day job, I'm a full stack developer, mostly making websites, as well as a DEI advocate and founder of Constant Coding. You might have heard me talking about DEI in Korea and my group on the Women Who Code podcast, which was released on October 9th this year. I'm also currently organizing a hackathon, and you can find it at Seoul Tech Impact. Anyone in the world is allowed to join remotely. Please have a look at the website and see if you like it. Seoul Tech Impact is that website. As I mentioned already, I did win the Women Who Code Hackathon with my solo project Moodlets, and I'm going to be talking a bit about that today. You can also find the early version on the iOS store right now. In addition to tech things, I'm also a really big dog lover, and I try to help rescue dogs whenever I can. And I also really love spending time exploring and hiking with my own rescue dog whenever the weather is nice. If there's anything that I mentioned today that you're interested in, or if you have questions that we don't get around to answering later, please feel free to find me on LinkedIn and drop me a message. Okay, so into the actual hackathon mindset. Before even coming up with an idea, it's really important to understand the real purpose of hackathons. It's not necessarily about winning, although that is always a bonus. Hackathons are about more than just coding or technical skills. They're about embracing challenges, collaborating quickly and effectively, and thriving under pressure. I view hackathons as opportunities to grow, network, and push my limits. I don't just mean limits in terms of technical ability. Sometimes that's also about stretching your physical and mental limits. So when you're joining a hackathon with a tight schedule, mental and physical well-being can really be a factor. And you should always try to remember to take breaks and sleep. For a 24-hour hackathon, don't make the mistake of trying to be awake the whole time. Coding is really energy consuming, and your brain needs a break, even just for 3 or 4 hours. Similarly, if you're failing to do something over and over, take a break. Go have a shower, make some coffee, just get away from your screen. You might find some fresh ideas and solutions popping up because your brain is going to keep trying to problem solve in the background. And if you're still really stuck and you're thinking about the hackathon clock counting down, just pause on whatever that functional component is, focus on something else, come back to it later. Or maybe you may not even come back to it at all. You may have to adapt. We'll come back to that later. But when it comes to the challenges, don't choose an idea or a category that will be a breeze for you. I always try to choose things that will be challenging, such as a new language, a new framework, a different library. If I know what I want my idea to be, that means that I'm always going to be learning. So even if I already have an idea of what I want to make, using new methods or libraries can really make it a bit more challenging and much more interesting for me. And it also means that I'm always going to be learning and gaining through every single step. Even if the idea itself is pretty simple, or even if I can't complete it during the hackathon time, I'm still going to be gaining from it. So there's also room for development in hackathons beyond the technical side. Hackathons are a really great opportunity to work in a team with new people and practice your organizational and prioritizational skills, and proving that you can hopefully complete a project within a tight deadline and under stressful conditions. Hackathons are always stressful. Remember though, every hackathon is also a unique adventure, and how you approach it can make a really big difference. So if you go in with a mindset of, I want to win, you're not going to have a good time. You're going to add extra stress that you don't need to add to yourself. That's a really, really bad way to approach a hackathon. But if you go in with a mindset of, I just want to learn something new, or I just want to work in a team, then you will have a positive outcome and you will have gains from the hackathon, no matter what the final results are. So always try to keep a more positive mindset and don't just focus on winning or trying to get some kind of award. So now let's talk about the ideas. First, not every hackathon idea has to be a great one or an original one. A lot of hackathons are won by very simple or existing ideas that were executed in a beautiful or unique way. So don't put that pressure on yourself to come up with something brand new. Ideas can come from absolutely anywhere. For me, I actually keep a list on my phone of ideas of things that could eventually become something, may never become something. Some of them are ideas that people have said to me. Some of them are just random things that I thought of on the subway, but I write them down just in case. For my Moodlets project from this recent hackathon, the idea actually came to me from a conversation I had months ago with a friend who is obsessed with The Sims 3. And she asked me, hey, do you know any apps that track your mood like The Sims? And I had a quick look and I couldn't find anything quite like that. So I just wrote it down and I thought, oh, maybe this could be something eventually. It's kind of a cool idea, but I didn't really know what to do with it. I had kind of an embryo of an idea. I didn't know how to do it or how to design it or anything else. So that is just somewhere that ideas can come from. You can also look for inspiration from the hackathon topic itself or from global problems. So for example, you could pick any of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I think there's 17 of them. And just looking at those, you can be inspired. For example, goal number 6 is to help improve access to clean water. Or you could do something to increase education or access to quality education. That's goal number 4. You might also get inspired from your own workplace. Look around and think of something small that could help other people or just yourself. You can look at other industries as well. Like every single industry has its own challenges that are just waiting for tech-driven solutions. When coming up with an idea, though, it's really important to verify if it is actually feasible or possible for you to make. So think very small, but potentially impactful. Don't think, I'm going to make the next ChatGPT or I'm going to make the next Instagram. Try narrow it down as small as you can to a very small or specific audience, and this will make it much more possible for you to do in a smaller time frame in a hackathon. So instead of making the next Instagram, you could say, oh, I want to make a website for teachers at this school to share photo updates with parents. Or instead of the next ChatGPT, you could use the ChatGPT API to create a simple chatbot to help tourists visit local historical sites in your town. Make it very specific, very small, very niche. But also try to remember to try to fit your idea to the theme of the hackathon if it has a theme. Just always have that theme in the back of your mind when you're thinking. Okay, let's talk about teams. The right team can turn a good idea into a winning project, but as I know from experience, you don't always need a team to succeed, but it will often make for a better project. When building your team, look for a mix of skills that complement complement each other, including coding, design, project management, and communication. It's not just about technical skills. The soft skills like adaptability, problem solving, and the ability to work under pressure are super important. I would also consider communication as one of the most important skills during a hackathon, because a team with poor communication will be a lot less efficient and less likely to submit a completed project. Make sure everyone who joins the team is aware also from the beginning of the tech stack and the idea or the project goals. Once your team is gathered, make sure to establish really clear communication channels. You want to have regular check-ins, whether in person or virtual. These are really crucial to make sure everyone is on the same page. You can use tools like Slack or Discord for communication, Trello and GitHub projects for task management, and definitely use GitHub or something very similar for code collaboration. Once you have your team together, you need to be assigning roles based on the members' strengths. So for example, in one of my previous winning teams, we had just 2 developers and a designer. So we split the development work amongst us 2 developers, but the other developer was much more front end and design focused. So what happened was she did a lot of the front end stuff and I focused on the back end. And as a result, we had a much more beautiful and a lovely looking design. And it also helped us to work a bit more efficiently and avoid overlaps. So in a small team like that, it's really also important to have someone who is very highly organized and can keep a handle on the overall project and the hackathon submission, as well as whatever technical skills that they have. As you might have guessed, organization is key. You've got to set deadlines for each phase and have regular updates on progress within your team. So for example, in a 24-hour hackathon, you want the basic designs within 1 hour. Or maybe you want basic sign up and registration screens like completed within 1.5 hours. Sounds like a very small amount of time, but with ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot, you can actually make these things a lot faster. And you should use these tools to help you become more efficient in your work. That's not to say just tell ChatGPT to do it, but it can help you build the framework a lot faster for stuff that is kind of really just sort of copy and paste in a lot of different projects. It's very similar structures. So in hackathons, time really is of the essence, and a well-organized team can make the most of it. So remember, really well organized and well communicating team is probably your greatest asset in a hackathon, even if your idea is something that's been done 1,000 times. So once you've got your team together, you want to lay your groundwork. What this means is starting the actual building process. But before you start building, you want to do your planning. You need to begin with clear goals, understand your target users, and define the key features of your projects. As I've already said before, you need to make sure everyone in the team has a clear role from the outset and they know what they're supposed to be doing. So you want to start by making sure that you know what your idea is and you know what your technology is. Is it a website? Is it an app? Is it hardware? And what is the desired final result of the idea? Do you want it to have 100% functionality, or do you just want enough mock data for the presentation? Your team should be aiming towards whatever you choose throughout the hackathon. So in my case with Moodlets, I started off with the basic idea, and I wanted to make an app to show moods and needs, but I wanted to make it so that it would be almost production ready. Like I wanted to be able to put it on the App Store as soon as possible after the hackathon. So I had that in mind from the very beginning, and that meant I couldn't really mock the data. I had to do everything properly. But you can't do that from the very beginning. And because I also didn't really have a team, I just had to start drawing my own designs in a little notebook and start coding right away. And I used existing UI libraries to help with the styling and colors, because that's something that's really hard for me to do. But if you have a designer on your team, you can get them to draw very basic wireframes or mockups as soon as possible. They don't need to be perfect or detailed at all. And when I've worked in hackathon teams before, we've had both Figma mockups and just sketches on a piece of paper. The important thing is just to have some very basic layout before you start coding so you don't waste a huge amount of time. And you should try and consider the design, however you draw it, from the user perspective and what functions they would need to see, and prioritize the functionality, as I've already said, for whatever you want your end goal to be. If it's a full production worthy thing, or if it's something that just needs to be functional for the demonstrations. So don't waste time making buttons or screens that are never going to be seen or used during the demo if that's not your goal. Remember to try and keep your design simple and clean, and you can always add more details later if you have time. You should also break the project into lots of small, manageable tasks and set deadlines. If you're lucky to have someone who can play the role of manager, that's great. But as I've said before, someone always needs to take the lead to make sure all the parts are coming together and no one is left waiting for anyone else. I've mentioned a few times, time is always of the essence. So if you're a developer waiting for designs, you can always be doing something. For example, you can make your basic app or your basic website, and you can add stuff to make your code more clean, like ESLint or prettier, while you're waiting for designs. If you're a non-tech person, you can spend time on the final presentation or the hackathon submission or making the GitHub README really stand out. What you don't want is anyone in your team sitting around being ignored or being bored. There's always something in a hackathon that you can be doing. So now the building phase. This is really where the technical skills are supposed to shine. I've already mentioned you want to start with developing a very basic functional version of your idea. It doesn't need to have anything like user logins or signups. You can add those later if you have time. You'll progressively add on and enhance the features as you work or as your time allows. So for my hackathon project, I focused solely on a profile page first. And I wanted to make sure that the users could update their current mood to Firebase. And I had to break that down into parts. I had a screen display to click on things, and I wanted a function to add documents to Firebase. In order to even get that far, first I needed to create the app and I needed to set up Firebase. So in my case, I actually worked backwards. I had the idea of what I wanted first and I broke it down, and I started doing piece by piece from design first and then functions. If you're a better planner than me, you can actually do things in the right order and start building from the functions first to the designs. After creating the Firebase, though, I realized I would need some sort of feedback for the success or error messages. So then I added those. And later I added some animation effects. So each time I was working on something, I realized, oh, I could add this, oh, I could add that to make it better and improve it more. So you can choose to add or not add things just as the time allows. But make sure that your code is clean and well documented so that it's easy for other teammates to understand, as well as anyone that you're showing the code to, such as during your presentation, or judges may go and look in your GitHub repo. So make sure everything is really clear and clean. You also need to make sure to always communicate with your team members and collaborate. Especially if you're stuck on something, you should ask for help instead of wasting time trying to debug it. Usually it's best to allocate different pages and screens to different devs and make sure to have time to merge them properly well before the end. You should, of course, be using Git or some sort of version control to manage that. Do not forget to allow time for testing and fixing. There will always be bugs. In a hackathon, you either have to find a way to fix them quickly or work around them. And what I mean by this is, if something is really absolutely not working the way that you expect it to, you need to either adapt your functions so that it looks like it's working the way you expect it to, or you need to kind of remove it. It's a hackathon. You're allowed to do really hacky things like that, which you could never get away with in a professional setting. You can hide the bugs and you can sort of adapt in ways that you wouldn't normally be able to do. All right, so in every single hackathon, there's obstacles and challenges. There's technical glitches, there's team dynamics, there's just the pressure of the ticking clock. And they all make every single hackathon special. And in my own recent hackathon, I faced some technical problems that made me really want to tear my hair out. There are so many things that can make you want to tear your hair out when you're doing a hackathon. But eventually I found ways, as I said, to either solve them or work around them for the final submission. You should always try to maintain focus and be ready to adapt what you have, and try to manage and think about what you can actually achieve in such a short amount of time. So in my case, what I would have really liked to do was to actually have push notifications. There is no way I was going to get that done within the time that I had for the hackathon. So I instead decided to do scheduled notifications, which are a lot easier to integrate in React Native Expo. So this was one of the ways that I just had to adapt with what I had and the time that I had available. You might also find challenges with your teammates. So for example, you might have someone who is just not being responsive. And if you're on a really tight schedule, this can be very problematic. You make sure you have multiple ways to reach someone. It's possible that they fell asleep at their desk and you need to call their phone and wake them up. It's also possible that they just got sucked into the code and they don't see any notifications from you. It happens all the time. But having multiple communication channels can really help reduce the stress that you get from that. Try to also stay flexible and calm with your teammates because you don't know anyone else's schedule or life. And you should always treat them with generosity and kindness because in a hackathon, your teammates are also volunteering to do that. They don't have to be a part of your team. They can leave at any time. Same as you, if you're really, really unhappy with your team and someone is not treating you with kindness, you don't have to stay a part of that team. So just bear in mind, you're all volunteering to be there and to contribute to that project. So be respectful and generous to each other. Similarly, be open to changes in the original plan or idea. I've said this many times, the adaptability, I really cannot emphasize enough. If your team doesn't have the tech capacity as well to make what you really want, you just got to adapt with what you do have. The ability to adapt and overcome is what transforms a good hackathon participant into a great one. So try to remember that. Flexibility, adaptability. Okay, maintaining the motivation throughout the hackathon. One of the hardest things is trying to maintain that, especially for a hackathon that is more than 24 hours. It can be really easy to start with high energy and enthusiasm, but maintaining that, especially during the challenging moments, is really a key to success. First, set your clear personal and team goals based on whatever the idea is, whatever plans you had earlier. These goals should be very specific, achievable, and aligned with the overall objectives. They give you something tangible to strive for. So for example, it can be, okay, by the end of day one, I want to have this basic screen finished. And then celebrate those small wins along the way. Completed a challenging piece of code, solved a tricky problem. These are milestones worth acknowledging, both for yourself and your teammates. They can help boost morale and keep everyone motivated. So in my case, when I was working alone, just setting up the Firebase authentication to work on the app, to get that to work correctly, that was a celebration for me. Another one was when the notifications actually worked, I cheered when it popped up on my phone. I was so happy. So these small things, these small goals can really help keep you motivated and recognize you're making progress. You're having success. It's also really important to keep your team inspired as well. You want to take short breaks, share memes, and do not look at what anyone else is doing. In a hackathon, comparison is the devil, and it will only demotivate you. Just don't look at what anyone else is doing. Do not do it. But don't underestimate the power of team spirit and support. Encourage each other, offer help when needed, and maintain a positive attitude. And this collective energy can be the driving force that keeps everyone going. Maintaining that positive outlook, even when you're exhausted and frustrated, challenges are always going to be inevitable, but you want to kind of embrace the suck, as people say. Just try to remember you're going to learn something, you're going to gain something no matter what. And remember to break the challenges down into very small pieces and take each problem just one step at a time. And try your best to create a finished functional project. Okay, the final stretch. So as you approach the end of the hackathon, it's crucial to finalize and submit your project effectively. You need to make sure your submission includes all of the required elements, like your code, your documentation, a demo video. You should spend a fair amount of time on this. I would also strongly recommend getting someone in the team to come through all of the files to check for really obvious stuff like console logs or blocks of commented out code, just to tidy things up for when the technical judges come looking. Your submission does not need to be perfect, but it should really clearly showcase all the things that you've worked on, the challenges you faced, and how it's going to solve the problem that you were trying to solve with your initial idea. When it comes to the presentation, it can be really beneficial to create a narrative that captures the essence of your project, and some people do use storytelling for this. But remember to be clear and concise and confident. I would also recommend pre-recording a demo instead of doing a live demo for your presentation. This really reduces the chances of errors or bugs occurring, and there's always a very, very high chance of that happening. It happened to me, it will probably happen to you. Similarly, if you have multiple people involved in the presentation, make sure everyone is ready and prepared with the right screens. You can do rehearsal presentations together beforehand just to make sure everything goes smoothly. There's nothing more awkward than waiting 30 seconds for someone to swap their screen when you only have 5 minutes to do a presentation. Remember, the presentation is your moment to showcase not just your project, but also your passion and your vision. If you aren't showing enthusiasm for your project in your presentation, it's really, really hard for your audience to feel enthusiastic as well. So try to maintain that positive outlook, not only throughout the hackathon, but also in your presentation. Okay, so when you come to the end, what you need to really remember as well is that hackathons are a journey of learning, growth, and creativity. After you've submitted everything and you've gotten some sleep, you want to reflect on your experiences, try to absorb the lessons from your successes and from your failures, and use these insights for your next challenge, for your next hackathon. Each hackathon is an opportunity to develop as a problem solver, as an innovator, as a team player, but don't forget that you're also supposed to be enjoying yourself. It's very stressful, but it's also supposed to be fun. If you're not having fun doing it, try to take a little bit of a step back. Try to make it fun for you again. Okay, thank you all for following along with this guide to winning hackathons, and I hope it's provided you with some insights to help you smash your next hackathon. And I'm looking forward to answering any of the questions that you might have. I think we've got a few already. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and hopefully get some questions from you all. Okay, hackathon projects need to work perfectly by the deadline. What could you do if your project isn't working as intended by the end of the hackathon? So as I kind of already mentioned, it doesn't need to be working perfectly, but if you can disguise the issues that you have or hide them or try to work around them, that is really what you want to do. You don't want to show in your presentation, this thing is extremely broken. What you would like to rephrase it as, we had a challenge trying to make this work exactly the way that we wanted it to work. So instead we did this. If it's not working exactly as intended, you may want to adjust your original idea so that it is working as intended by the end. Basically, you're adapting your idea to what you have by the end of the hackathon timeout. If it's not exactly what you expected, well, now your idea is different. It's yeah, basically adapt what you have, hide what you can, interpret more positively, perhaps the features or the bugs that may not be working the way that you expected. I hope that answers your question, Andre. I see there's another question in a couple other questions in the Q&As. If you don't mind, I'll just read and answer those, Ophelia. Okay, so if you're not the strongest technically in the group, how else can you help besides coding? So this is actually really useful. As I said, organizing is a really, really big part of making the hackathon team. So if you're not good at coding, you can take the role of the organizer. You can make sure that everyone is doing exactly what they're doing. You can basically be a project manager. You want to make sure everyone knows what they're doing, everyone is doing what they're supposed to be doing, everything is going to be completed on time. And you also can help contribute a lot to the final presentation. The final presentation can actually take a lot of effort to prepare. It can take a few hours even to make those beautiful slides and prepare the demo. So if you're not technically minded, that's where you can put all of your energies to make something really beautiful and stand out. as well as I said, on the organizational side or on the motivational side. Keep your teammates motivated, you know, cheer them up, do whatever you can to keep them going. I think there's some other questions. Let me just check in the chat a little bit. So what is the biggest challenge that I faced while I was in a hackathon, and how did I handle it? This is really hard to answer. I think every hackathon comes with its own challenges. In the very first hackathon that I did, the biggest challenge that we had was that I was working in a team with one other person, and we were on completely different time zones, and their time zone was basically the opposite of mine. So when I wanted to communicate, either they were sleeping or I was sleeping. So it was really hard to make sure we were on the same page, and I ended up doing a lot of the work just because also the other person wasn't quite as proficient as myself in certain things. And that can just happen in a hackathon sometimes. Not everyone has the same skill level, and sometimes one person or two people will do a lot more of the work than some of the other people. But as long as everyone is contributing in some way to the team, that's really all that matters. I can see there is another question also from Andre. Okay, this is a big question. Josie mentioned that hackathons can be stressful. I believe she said she prefers to use less familiar tech for her hackathon projects. I think using new tech can add a bit of stress for some people, so they can reduce the stress by using familiar tech for their projects. This could be especially useful for less experienced devs. What do you think about this approach? I think that's absolutely true. If doing a hackathon itself, if it's your first hackathon, yes, absolutely use stuff that you're already familiar with. It's already going to be stressful and challenging for you. The challenge may come in other ways. The challenge might just be from that ticking clock. The challenge might be from the organizational side or the teamwork side. You don't need to always include a different language, but for me, it adds an extra layer of challenge. So it's not for everyone, but I also really like to learn and gain new technical skills in my hackathons. And not everyone needs to do that. If you're going to be learning from the team, you're going to be learning your organizational skills. That is also really, really beneficial. You don't always have to use new libraries or new technologies. It just depends on what your goal is going into that hackathon. Do we have any other questions? I'm just going to scroll through the chat a little bit. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, but if you have one, please feel free to ask. You can ask also in the chat or anywhere, really. Okay, I can see some in the Q&A. So Andre, Moodlets is already released on iOS. It's still waiting for Android approval. You can find it under the name Moodlets. It's not a very creative name. You've got to make sure it has the S on the end or else it won't find it. Okay, there's another question from Anonymous that says, how do you determine who is the leader that helped with organizing the task and who does that? So basically, it depends on who in your team has a more leader kind of personality. It's usually people who are more familiar with planning and organizing to begin with. If you have no one in your team who has ever organized or planned anything in their lives, then just do rock, paper, scissors for it, and you will learn that skill. But usually it's best to have someone who has already had some familiarity with organizing anything. They have already organized, they've already planned, perhaps, maybe they planned a birthday party. That works, literally anything. So you don't have to have someone who is a mega organized person, just someone who has some familiarity with planning and getting things coming together. I can see there's some more questions. There's one in the chat that says, have you ever struggled with changing your idea halfway through, and how did you handle that? Yes, sometimes I've come up with an idea and it's been too large for the hackathon, like the scope was too big, it was just not feasible. You basically have to cut it in half, or you have to just scale it down a lot more to something that you can do within the time. And I try not to struggle too much with it, because after the hackathon, you can always continue the project. You don't have to throw it out in the trash afterwards. You can always continue, and you can add on the features. For the hackathon, you just want to focus on a very, very small thing with limited functionality, and then later you can develop it, further. So you shouldn't struggle too much with changing your idea halfway through. The most frustrating thing is when you change it and you have to rewrite a lot of code. In that case, if it's really, really, really necessary to do that, then you kind of have to do it. Otherwise, continue as much as you can and try to avoid rewriting lots and lots of code. There's also a few more questions. How do you write about your hackathon experience in your resume? For me, I put it down in like an extra section of things that I do, and I've usually written about, like, if I've won something, then I'll put it in my resume. But I talk about it a lot more in interviews when people ask about certain types of experiences or working under pressure. It's really easy to draw upon my hackathon experience because it's like a contained project. Whereas when I say about my work life, there's so many different things I could talk about. It's much easier to talk about hackathons in the interviews and talking about working in a small team, going under a deadline. How do you manage when there are some team members who butt heads? Well, this is kind of just a reality of life. It also happens in the professional workspace as well. And all we can do is try to be polite and kind to each other. And if these people are fighting, try to limit their interactions, and try to remind them also to be kind to each other, because neither of them actually has to be in the team. When you're in a team together, you're volunteering to be in that team together. And you also do not have to be in a team if you have members who are not getting on very well. So how do you select who to pick into the team except for tech stacks? And what are the red flags of a person that you'd avoid? Okay, so selecting the team, it depends how many candidates you have who are willing to join your team. You might not have that many options. Obviously, it's also really good to have someone who has tech skills and also organizational skills, or really good communication skills, problem-solving skills, these things. In terms of the red flags, there's nothing that immediately comes to mind unless you have heard something about someone, like they steal ideas or something like that. Yeah, there's no immediate red flags that come to mind. I would say just try to have a conversation and make sure that you can communicate well with the other people in the team who can potentially join the team. If you're chatting with them and your communication is not going well and you're like, things are getting lost in translation, they may not be a good person to have on your team. It's not so much red flags usually, but orange flags. But again, as I said, there's usually not that many options for people wanting to join your team. So sometimes you just have to have people who maybe not be the best option, but they're willing to contribute. Another question, how many hackathons have you participated in? What's your favorite project? This was my third hackathon. So in each of the hackathons, I usually only do one per year because I'm very busy, and actually living in South Korea, there's not really opportunities to join hackathons very often. And in terms of my favorite one, I think all of them have a special place in my heart in a way. The very first one I really, really enjoyed because maybe it was the first time, because it was a 24-hour one. You know, I had to stay up late, I had to code into the night, and I liked the concept. And it was really thrilling to enter the first hackathon and then win something. That was really wonderful for me. But actually, this Moodlets project is probably also one of my favorites, because I'm going to share it with a lot more other people. In my previous ones, none of them actually went into production afterwards. You can still find them like hosted online somewhere, but they're not actual real production level apps or websites. They're just sort of like demo versions. So for me, yeah, Moodlets was my favorite one so far. Okay, there's a couple more questions gathered from before the event, and I'm just going to drink some water.
Well, Josie, everybody loves your knowledge. That's why they're asking so many questions. Thank you so much for sharing it, your knowledge with us.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll answer the last 3 questions and then maybe we can take a break, or there can be more questions perhaps. What is one thing you wish you knew before entering your first hackathon, and how has this knowledge shaped your approach to subsequent events? That's a really good question. I guess I wish I knew that hackathons, although they're a team effort, there's always going to be people in the team who are doing more than others, and you should always just be happy to try and get a finished project by the end of it. Once you come in with that mindset as well, it really helps. And also for me, when I started that very first hackathon, I just wanted the experience of doing a hackathon. I just wanted to challenge myself to make something within 24 hours. And having that before I even started the hackathon made me really enjoy it. I would also say hackathons also usually have a lot of different workshops and stuff going on during them. And what I wish I could do was have the time to both do the code and participate in the workshops, because the workshops themselves can be a really good opportunity to learn new things. Another question, have you always been a solo participant, or have you ever worked in a team? What, in your opinion, are the pros and cons of both approaches? I've done both. I've done 2 hackathons in teams, and this recent one was my only solo one so far. The pros of working solo are you can kind of do everything yourself, so you don't have to argue with anyone about anything, and you don't have to wait for anyone to do anything. The cons are you have to do everything yourself and there's no one to give you better ideas or better input, better designs. You have to just do it yourself. Okay, after a hackathon, how do you determine whether a project has potential beyond the events? What steps do you take to further develop or refine a successful hackathon project into something more sustainable or market ready? So as I mentioned, 2 of the other projects that I did kind of have potential to be something beyond the event, but ultimately it wasn't something that happened. Like one of them that I worked on last year was specifically a community arts sort of based map project, and in order to take that to the next level, it would need collaboration with members of that community or a special community group, and they weren't really interested in collaborating for whatever reason. In terms of moodlets for that, as I've said, I've already published it now. And so what I did in the couple of weeks since the hackathon and now, to make it sort of ready and sustainable for the market, I had to do some adaptations to make it a bit more secure, a lot more secure to actually be able to publish it. And to make it market ready, you also need a bunch of stuff. Like you need to have like actual working signups and logins. You need to have forgot password sections. You need to have the ability for users to delete their account. You need to have privacy policies and terms and conditions. These are very basic things that you need to have basically on anything that's published online or on the App Store these days. So those would be the very first steps that I take whenever I'm going to take something from just a project to being online and available. And in terms of making it more sustainable, first, you always need to check that your app is not going to cost you money to put it online or put it anywhere. So in my case, that's why I used Firebase from the beginning, because it doesn't cost me anything to put Firebase into an app, and up to a certain number of users, daily users, it's going to be free. So Firebase is a really good option for hackathons. Firebase is the Google sort of database and clouds. Like you can do authentication, you can do storage, you can do all kinds of things. But it is free up to a certain point, and that is really helpful during hackathons. I'd recommend it because you can just make something very quickly and you can do it for free. And then later, if you want to scale it up, and you have thousands of users, then you can easily start paying for things. But yeah, in terms of sustainability and market ready, is it going to cost you money? If it's going to cost you money, you need to figure out how you're going to pay for that. And if your app or your website needs like some sort of paid functionality in it, that would be the very next step after that. Okay, I hope I've answered all of the questions.